Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Virtual Doll Convention. My name is Alan Scott Pate, and I tend to focus less on Dolly Dingle than on Japanese dolls. And so Rachel has kindly invited me to give an introduction or a talk or some sort of entertainment to add to this year's Virtual Doll Convention, or this March's Virtual Doll Convention. And for that, I decided to do somewhat of a deep dive into one particular Ichimatsu Ningyo artist, and that is Koryusai. Now, I'm sort of jumping right into this because I tend to be long-winded, and that's going to be no exception. Today's going to be no exception. But I want to spend a little bit of time talking about first the development of Ichimatsu Ningyo, where they came from, before going deep into the history and artistry and brilliance of this particular artist. But I also want to spend a second announcing a forthcoming book that will be on Ichimatsu. As you can see, the title, Ichimatsu, Japanese Play Dolls. And this, I hope, will become, in essence, the Bible, if you will, for collectors and fans and those who just love Japanese dolls in general, but the Ichimatsu form in particular. And part of the appeal and the mystery and what keeps me so engaged with Ichimatsu in particular is that it has a fascinating, truly riveting history as a doll form that's also masked or hidden partially by time, secrecy, lack of documents. And so it's always a little bit of a art historical forensic dive when you try to figure out exactly what's going on and where these dolls came from. And quite frequently, we have to turn back to woodblock prints and paintings, for which there are more extant examples than actual dolls when we get back to some of these earlier periods. Particularly when we're dealing with the early 1700s. And that was the period which gave birth to Ichimatsu Ningyo. Now, Ichimatsu as a name is tied very, very specifically with an acting lineage. An actor by the name of Sanogawa Ichimatsu, the first, had his career launch in the early 1700s, first half of the 1700s, and he went on to have a lineage with Sanogawa Ichimatsu 2 and 3 and all of that. But we're going to focus on largely the first and how dolls depicting actors became very much a fad and popular during the opening decades of the 18th century, early 1700s. And so we look at what are known as Isho Ningyo, or fashion dolls. And these dolls, I've spoken about them before, and some of this will be familiar for some of you. But fashion dolls, as a term, tends to focus on the textiles of the dolls. And as a result, the name Isho has been translated as fashion. So it's the textiles that are the hook. But in point of fact, there's also stories that are depicted, famous courtesans, famous actors, famous heroes, warriors, that type of thing, became a very popular subject matter for doll makers throughout the 18th century. And so Isho Ningyo were a very, very popular display doll form. They're static. You can't really do much with them, but look at them. And we find paintings and woodblock prints beginning in the opening decades of the 1700s depicting people with these dolls, frequently actor dolls. So here on the left, you see a bijin, or a beautiful woman, holding up a doll depicting Ichikawa Danjuro II, who was a very, very popular, versatile, dramatic actor, roughly contemporaneous, but slightly earlier than Sanogawa Ichimatsu, that we'll get into. But you find many, many dolls depicting, or paintings depicting people holding dolls depicting Ichikawa Danjuro in some of his most famous roles. And so here are two paintings, one a detail of the second painting showing Ichikawa Danjuro in one of his more famous roles. But dolls, as I've often noted and like to focus on and point out, played a wide variety of roles and occupied and fulfilled a lot of functions that dolls quite frequently in the Western tradition don't get there. And so this is a woodblock print depicting a moxa shop, and moxa was a type of medicine. And the name of the shop was Mimasu, and that happens to be the same crest that Ichikawa Danjiro has. And Mimasu means three nested rice measuring boxes. That's the sort of the concentric square design that you see advertised in the banner above, but also on the sort of the kanban or the shop sign in front. But this particular moxa shop, the Mimasu moxa shop, also used dolls depicting Ichikawa Danjiro in a role with that crest as sort of a mascot, as a kanban, so a large-scale doll shown there to advertising and sort of beckoning customers into the shop, sort of a maneki neko, a beckoning cat, but in actor form, dating through the very, very early 1700s. Now, dolls and doll makers are a little bit, it's very difficult to get down to brass tacks about who made various dolls and that type of thing, but we do know from these paintings, from these prints, that there was a robust trade in Japanese dolls depicting actors during the 18th century. And this is a very, just a delightful print that I like to focus on. This is out of the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. And so here you have the actor Ichikawa Danjiro again, but the seventh generation. This print was done in the early 19th century, but depicting a doll in the background, depicting that same actor, Ichikawa Danjiro II, in one of his most famous roles, and that was Yanonne, or the arrow sharpening scene. And this is a massive doll set there in the alcove, and you can see it's quite fun. He's Ichikawa Danjiro VII is holding his young son, who will be the eighth, on his arms. And this is on the occasion of his son's first Hatsuseku, his first Boys' Day celebration, and he's there. And you can see Ichikawa Danjiro looking over his shoulder at this, very foreboding or forbidding or imposing presence of his ancestor. And you can almost feel the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. But what I really, truly love about this print is not only that it depicts a fabulous doll, large scale, great subject matter, but that the doll itself was done by the artist. So this print was done by Toyokuni. Toyokuni's father was Kurohashi Gorobe. Now, Gorobe was a doll maker who specialized in nigao ningyo, or portrait dolls of actors. So much in the same way that Toyokuni would make his living creating prints depicting celebrated actors of his day, but in woodblock print form. His father, Gorobe, Kurohashi Gorobe, also had a career, but creating dolls depicting actors that were famous during his period, during his lifetime. And so this is a doll that Gorobe had done depicting Ichikawa Danjiro, so the seventh ancestor. And the story goes that Toyokuni had this in his personal collection. And one day, the actor, Ichikawa Danjiro VII, comes over to Toyokuni's studio, and there he encounters this doll of his ancestor. And he is moved to tears, and just struck by this sort of unexpected opportunity to literally meet, in some regards, his famous forebear. And Toyokuni is moved as well and decides to gift this very important doll by his father, Gorobe, to Toyokuni, to Ichikawa Danjiro VII, who then took it home and had it part of his personal collection. And so this print not only memorializes the actor, Ichikawa Danjiro II, in doll form, but also the seventh, that current actor that was alive during Toyokuni's day, but also Toyokuni's father, Kurohashi Gorobe, the doll maker. Now, actor dolls, what they might have looked like in real life, or this, for example, is a Isho Ningyo depicting an actor in the role of Asahina. And we know it's depicting a kabuki actor because of all the kumadori makeup lines that are decorating the face there. So we know for a fact that this is a doll depicting an actor. And this is very much what those dolls that we've seen in the woodblock prints, the smaller ones that were being held up, would have looked like in actuality, static, held on the stage. And so this is sort of the world in which Ichimatsu as a doll arrived. So why aren't the dolls called Ichikawa Ningyo as opposed to Ichimatsu Ningyo? Well, that's because In the late 17, or the, I'm sorry, in the opening decades of the 1700s, a young actor by the name of Sanagawa Ichimatsu I arrived on the scene. Now, Sanagawa Ichimatsu, by all accounts, was a beautiful young man. So beautiful that he also performed both young male romantic leads, but also female leads. And he had a very exuberant fan base, both male and female. And it is noted that dolls depicting Sanagawa Ichimatsu began to appear in the late 1730s and 1740s. And so here's a beautiful woodblock print of the actor Sanagawa Ichimatsu. Now, we know this not only because of the writing and the inscriptions on the print, but also because of that very dramatic and very prominent crest there on the sleeve, the circle incorporating of the character there. So this tells us without doubt that this is Sanagawa Ichimatsu, and he's holding aloft a doll. And the inscription itself says that the doll is Ichimatsu, Sanagawa Ichimatsu. So this is a doll, or this is the actor Sanagawa Ichimatsu holding up a doll of himself in a female role. Now we know from written records, which aren't so sexy to display on screen, but just documents, particularly a document known as the Morisada Manko, which is sort of an encyclopedia, or the Morisada's miscellany. And he was writing in the mid-19th century about the history of, he was observing and illustrating various aspects of contemporary Japanese culture during his day, was known as the Edo period life and customs. And he's one of the few contemporary observers that actually deigned, if you will, to focus on dolls and to give us a little bit of history about Japanese dolls. And he talks about Ichimatsu very specifically and links them to this actor, Sanagawa Ichimatsu, indicating that the name Ichimatsu Ningyo came very specifically from this actor and the dolls that were made depicting him. And quite frankly, as we start looking through woodblock prints and paintings, here's another painting, this one from the Chicago Institute of the Arts, showing an actor, Kikugoro, Onoe Kikugoro, in a female role, holding up a doll depicting Sanagawa Ichimatsu. And again, we know this is Sanagawa Ichimatsu from the crest, that dramatic crest on the doll's sleeve there. So this is Kikugoro holding up a doll depicting Sanagawa Ichimatsu, this one dating from the 1740s. And so we know that at that point, there existed dolls being done of Sanagawa Ichimatsu. So we have proof positive that Morisada Manko, Morisada and his Morisada Manko, is speaking of some truth in that there were dolls depicting this actor. So, but as we start looking a little bit more into the prints and paintings, we find that, and then basically the history of kabuki, because, as a kabuki actor, kabuki studies is very well advanced, much further than Ningyo studies, unfortunately. And so as we start looking and delving into kabuki studies, we find that Kikugoro and Ichimatsu actually share the stage a number of times, and there are a number of prints depicting them sharing the role. Kikugoro specialized in women's roles, also did male role, much like Ichimatsu. So they were very much rivals at the time. And so some of these prints also bespeak a certain rivalry that would have existed. But here's a lovely print of them, Kikugoro on the right, Ichimatsu on the left. You can see there with the crest there on his sleeve in a role. But I want to delve into this particular role because there are a number of prints of this particular performance that show Kikugoro and other actors and Sanagawa Ichimatsu in various parts of that play, various elements of the play. But I want to draw in and dial in, if you will, to this. So this is the left hand part of that triptych that we were just looking at. And here's Sanagawa Ichimatsu again, we know because of the crest. But I want you to look a little bit at his hemline there that I have sort of magnified. And you'll start to see a hint of a little checkerboard pattern. Now, this checkerboard pattern might, in this particular print, seem to be a little bit random. So it's a checkerboard design, big deal. But as we start really looking at Sanagawa Ichimatsu's career, we find that in 1741, when he premiered in the Edo or Tokyo theaters, he was a Kyoto-based actor, had a great deal of fame and success early as he was developing in the Kyoto and Osaka area theaters, but he was brought up to Edo, Tokyo, in 1741 to premiere at a play. And for that premiere in 1741, he came out on stage in a female role wearing what, by all accounts, was a truly spectacular checkerboard patterned obi. Now, this checkerboard pattern created such a stir and created such a reaction amongst its fan base that it is said that this one performance and this one checkerboard patterned obi, worn by, of course, a very seductive, very famous actor on his premiere in Edo, started a minor fashion craze of men and women using the checkerboard pattern in their daily fashion, whether that be an obi, whether that be a coat, but using the checkerboard pattern as an homage, if you will, to Sanagawa Ichimatsu. So much so that as we look further and look at woodblock prints, almost invariably, as we move past the 1741 mark, and certainly as we get into 1750, almost every single print depicting not only Sanagawa Ichimatsu the first, but also the second and the third, include a dramatic use of this checkerboard pattern. So much so that the checkerboard pattern itself has come down to us and is known as an Ichimatsu moyo, or an Ichimatsu pattern, named after the actor Sanagawa Ichimatsu. And so it's sort of shorthand. When you see this woodblock prints depicting actors wearing the Ichimatsu print, we know generally that it is depicting Ichimatsu, Sanagawa Ichimatsu the first, and of course having his crest emblazoned sort of seals the deal. But prints are a little bit different than ningyo. Prints are different than dolls in that we have an abundance of information written, as you can see on these prints. Frequently the actor's name, frequently the role is named, frequently the date of the performance or the theater the performance is made. Ningyo, not so much. Ningyo, we have to rely on a little bit more fugitive material. Ideally, they come in an original box, but with that, then sometimes that box bears information, but sometimes not. So when we're looking at Isho Ningyo, right? So of the same time frame, so mid 1700s, give or take, and we find dolls, we have to do a little bit of triangulation, if you will, a little bit of looking into what might be depicted. So here I present a beautiful Isho Ningyo, a bijin, very fashionably dressed with this very luxurious uchigake outer coat with supplemental embroidery, figured silk. Underneath that, we catch a glimpse of an obi and an inner kimono. But as we start looking closer, we start seeing a little bit, we can see a little bit more of the neck and the hemline. We might notice that there is an Ichimatsu pattern taking place. So compare that to the Ichimatsu print that shows the checkerboard obi. We know for a fact that this would have been Sanagawa Ichimatsu. But when we look at a ningyo, displaying those same elements, and so here you can see at the neckline, it's faded, granted a little bit faded, but the same checkerboard pattern there. Right at her proper right shoulder on our left side, you can see a little bit more of the vibrancy that would have existed in this doll's textile when it was newly made. But if we look at the hem down below, we see that checkerboard pattern continues. So the entire inner kimono is of an Ichimatsu moyo. So is this doll depicting a fashionable lady from the 1750s wearing the fashion of the day, which would have been an Ichimatsu moyo, a fan of our actor, seductive as he was? Or is this actually a doll depicting Sanagawa Ichimatsu himself in a female role? Difficult to say without a box, with all the paperwork and that type of thing. But it is a subject of delicious speculation when we find these dolls. What might actually be going on? But moving right along, I digress. So today we're going to be focusing on an artist who made Ichimatsu Ningyo, but more in the 20th century, beginning in the about 1900 is where Koryusai's career kind of gets officially launched. But we know very little names of makers have come down to us. We find beginning in the Meiji era, Meiji runs from 1868 to 1912, the advent of photography, the advent of the beginnings of department stores and Western marketing techniques. And so we begin to have a little bit more information. So this is a beautiful, I love this Meiji era staged, obviously, photograph of what's supposed to be a doll maker in a very exotic way with these large Iki-style living dolls behind. But you also find little detritus of doll making down below with hands and feet elements, separated heads. Down the lower left, you can see a torso, a head, all the components of it. It's a little bit of a Frankenstein's workshop when you actually get down to it. Kind of creepy, but of course this was staged for the Western audience, likely a Western photographer who did this hand-tinted photograph during the Meiji era of a doll maker. But the point is we begin to find documentation. Now, some of this documentation is much more beautiful or much more accurate in terms of how things were done. So here we have an Ichimatsu Ningyo maker at work in his studio with the heads of Ichimatsu Ningyo there drying. He's applying gofun, which is that very special crushed oyster shell and animal glue composite that is the skin of nearly all forms of Japanese dolls. And so you can see the sort of alien-like creature there, a competed head and neck armature there in the foreground kind of staring at us. But this is, you can see a doll artist at work. Unfortunately, we don't have the name of this doll artist, this particular doll artist. During the Meiji era, we start having doll artist names percolate to the surface. We begin to have documentation. So like when we look at these three dolls here, they're actually signed. So on the left, we have a very large-scale Ichimatsu girl by the artist Togyoku. Now, Togyoku is a seminal early doll maker, largely responsible for setting the template for young girl dolls. And in the middle is another Togyoku, but actually sold through the Daimaru department store. There's a Daimaru label underneath her kimono. And on the right is a doll by the name, artist by the name of Ryugetsu. Now, we don't know really much about Ryugetsu or Togyoku. We know that they made dolls. We find dolls with them stamped. A few bits of documents, but we really don't have much what might be called coloratura about their life and their personalities as we do with some other dolls. So shifting a little bit, we have the Togyoku doll there on the left. And this is a boy doll, also large scale, by Takeuchi Masujiro. Now, Masujiro was an important Meiji era, late 19th century Ichimatsu doll artist that, in much the way Togyoku set his impress on the way that Ichimatsu girls would be displayed, Masujiro set his impress on how boys would be displayed. And so I like to refer to this pairing of a Togyoku girl with a Masujiro boy as basically the Adam and Eve of Ichimatsu, for this is the earliest or an early sort of entree into the codified form of Ichimatsu Ningyo. And so I present Adam and Eve for your viewing pleasure. Now, getting into the Koryusai lineage, Koryusai's father began his career as an apprentice to the very important Ningyo shop, Eitokusai. Now, Eitokusai, I've spoken at length in another video because Eitokusai focused on Mitsuore, a different type of doll, and I focused on him and actually used this wonderful hand-tinted photograph of a very large-scale Mitsuore pair that had been redressed for an exhibition in 1936, but they date from the Meiji era. So the same period as the Togyoku and Masujiro pair we were just looking at. This pair would have been done by Eitokusai at the same period, but it had been subsequently redressed for exhibition. And on the right there, you see the label for Eitokusai, his shop there in the Jukendana section of Nihonbashi in Tokyo. Now, it is almost impossible to overstate the importance of Eitokusai's shop lineage, but not only for the dolls that they created for the imperial family and for the nobility and upper echelons of Tokyo society, but also for their innovation within various aspects of Japanese dolls, but also as a fertile training ground for artisans. And artisans that would go on to become seminal in their own right in over the course of the early part of the 20th century. And namely, to begin with, Koryusai's lineage. So his father trained under Eitokusai, and went independent and became Koryusai I. He unfortunately passed in 1910, still in the Meiji era, but he was Koryusai II, Takizawa Yoshitoyo, Koryusai II's father. And now we're entering a period in which we have an abundance of information about personality, how these artisans worked, how they were raised, some of their idiosyncrasies. So, for example, we know that Koryusai II trained under his father, Koryusai I, and that Koryusai I was a very strict disciplinarian. That when Koryusai II began his apprenticeship under his father told him to no longer look at him as a father, but as his master in this craft. He's learning a craft, and conversely, he would no longer look at him as his son, but only as a student. And so standards were enforced, discipline meted, and it was a very rigorous. The apprenticeship program for an Ichimatsu Ningyo maker was rigorous, and Koryusai I put rigor in rigorous. But Koryusai I passed in 1910, and Koryusai II, by all accounts, was a prodigy, an amazing artisan, very skilled, very gifted, surpassed his father quickly, probably much to the chagrin of Koryusai I, or to his pride and happiness. But when the father passed in 1910, Koryusai II took on the lineage as Koryusai II, taking over the Koryusai lineage name, and was taking his own students prior to that, but became the driving force of that. And his specialty was Ichimatsu. And Ichimatsu during this period tended to be larger. They tended to be very artistic creations because their purpose was less for play, particularly in this level, if you will, but were frequently purchased as in pairs, male and female, as wedding gifts. And there was a great deal of emphasis on artistry. And Koryusai II was pretty much seen as the consummate artisan of Ichimatsu Ningyo in the opening decades of the 20th century. And fortunately, a number of his dolls are still extant from this period. And we see beautiful craftsmanship and not necessarily the standard dressing that you find later after the friendship dolls, which we'll get into shortly. But you just find a very unusual costuming, very much indicative of the period, the Taisho era. And here, this one I particularly love because when we look at his kimono, what is he wearing? But actually, an Ichimatsu pattern. So I love this Ichimatsu wearing an Ichimatsu pattern. I love that sort of double entendre, if you will. But when you open up and get down to the inner layer, you find what's called a dogami or a meshi. And that is what we call in English a signature cloth or a wrapping cloth that is wrapped around the torso of the doll after he is made or she is made. And the artist place his shome or his signature. And here we can see Koryusai, sai being an artistic convention meaning made, kind of. And then below is a faded seal called a rakan, which says Takizawa Yoshitoyo. So we know that this was done by Koryusai himself. So Koryusai in the shome, and then the rakan, his personal name, Takizawa Yoshitoyo. So beautiful example of what we look for underneath the costuming of all the dolls to verify artistry. But there are a number of really beautiful examples of Koryusai girls and boys. This is one of my favorites, a dramatic Taisho period kimono, beautiful face. Koryusai became known for sort of a bright, happy expression, and we'll get into that a little bit. But this girl is, one of my favorites. One of my favorite boys is this very large scale 28-inch boy by Koryusai, again, Taisho era, early show, right around the time of the friendship dolls. But again, with that happy face, just beautiful execution. The gofun, such a lustrous color, the painted hair, the insect glass eyes. This is the definition of an Ichimatsu, at least an Ichimatsu boy. But if we know about Japanese history, we also know that in 1923, we have the Great Kanto earthquake. The Great Kanto earthquake leveled many parts of Yokohama and Tokyo, wreaked economic, humanitarian havoc, a lot of death, disease. It was really bleak. It also decimated the Ningyo-cho, or the Ningyo making area of Tokyo. A lot of artisans lost their life, and they lost their ability to create. if they survived, they lost their materiel, and it was very, very hard on doll makers of all ilk, whether that be Hina, Musha, Isho, Ichimatsu, Daki, all of them were severely impacted by the Great Kanto earthquake. And to survive, they gathered together and they formed a group, formed what was called the a kumiai, or self-help organization. It was the Tokyo Wholesale Doll Traders Association in English. And this kumiai, this association, initially started to just sort of help ningyo makers just make it through, to survive these very, very difficult years. Now, I've given talks on this quite a bit, but we're going to, all roads kind of have to go through this when you're dealing with Ichimatsu. So the Friendship Doll Exchange of 1927, and I'm going to delve into this just a little bit. The Friendship Doll Exchange of 1927 was very salutary in that the doll industry had not yet recovered from the depredations or the destruction of the earthquake, not only because of all their loss of their houses and their ability to make, but also the market wasn't there. People recovering from the earthquake were not all into buying a lot of dolls, so it was a very slow and painful recovery. And the Friendship Dolls arriving in 1927, just as the country was getting back on its feet, was a huge shot in the arm, if you will, to the doll market, because it focused, sort of gave it an international gloss and an international respectability that was not lost on the Japanese themselves. And the creation of these 58 beautiful, large-scale Ichimatsu and Mitsuore Ningyo really was so much the salvation of the Japanese doll industry in some respects, particularly the Ichimatsu component. And I go into great length in my book, Artist Ambassador, the Japanese Friendship Dolls of 1927. And of course, my accountant would be remiss if I didn't encourage each and every one of you to purchase a copy. But in it, I go into great detail and all of this kind of stuff, but focusing on Koryusai a little bit, which is in fact the topic at hand. We know that out of the doll artisans that attempted to participate in the Friendship Doll Exchange, only 9 Tokyo-based artists were accepted to create the 51 dolls representing the prefectures and representing the overseas territorial holdings, while the honor of Miss Japan and the 6 principal cities, or 7 dolls, went to Maruhei Okiheizo in Kyoto, and he made Mitsuore, or triple jointed dolls, of a completely different make and style, but they were included as Miss Japan, Miss Nagoya, Miss Kobe, Miss Kyoto, Miss Osaka, Miss Yokohama, etc. And so, but our Tokyo 9, as I like to call them, these were the 9 artists. And it is interesting to note that Koryusai is shown here in the back. He's the only one wearing a Western suit. Now, 51 dolls, as I said, were made by Tokyo-based artists. Koryusai created 25 of those 51. And that's a very large percentage. Iwamura Shokunsai, he created the next number, next greatest number, 10, and I've spent a lot of time talking about Hirata Goyo in other talks, who made only 5, but his 5 were seen as stellar. But we're going to focus on Koryusai's contribution. And so when we look at the Friendship Dolls that we still have down to us today, we have, for example, this one, my first Friendship Doll. So she's a favorite of mine. This is Miss Fukushima / Ehime. We know that even though she's been named Miss Fukushima, she's the original Miss Ehime. We have Miss Akita, who actually is the original Miss Ishikawa, but also a beautiful Koryusai doll. One of my favorites, Miss Mie, who is the original Miss Miyazaki. Gets kind of confusing, but a beautiful, bright, open mouth expression. Miss Tokushima, Miss Saitama. And so in looking at these, I frequently get the lament that all dolls, all Japanese dolls look alike. And I think it's painful for me to hear that, because it is so not true. But I can understand if you're not used to looking at faces, Japanese doll faces, they can seem to blur together with the black hair and the banged hairstyle and just what seemingly sameness of the features. But when you start looking at each one individually, and you look at the manufacturing process within which Japanese friendship dolls, or not Japanese, excuse me, I'm so used to saying that, but Ichimatsu, and indeed all Ningyo are made, because you have Ichimatsu are made in a mold component. And I should hasten to add that when the friendship doll project came along, and they were going to be done in very large size, 83 centimeters, which is about 32 inches tall, only one lineage still had a mold large enough to produce the core templates for these dolls, and that was the Koryusai lineage. And so that's one of the reasons why Koryusai was responsible for so many, is that he largely supervised the initiation of the base templates that all the other artists would use. But in point of fact, he was so skillful. And so there was a group of Yamada Tokobe, Nishizawa Tekiho, and others who were judges to evaluate which dolls. So it wasn't necessarily rigged, but the fact that Koryusai had the mold certainly didn't hurt. And so it was Koryusai who provided the base templates for each and every one of the 51 dolls that represented Tokyo, even though the other artisans went into it. And how with the base mold, that only provides basic size. It is the added layers of the gofun, which are added bit by bit. In some iterations of the gofun, it can be sculpted with a knife. So you have details like the philtrum or the creases around the nose and the eye shape and things like that that are done by actually carving the gofun. And it's only the surface skin level where it's finally attenuated that creates the skin. But the rest of that, it works like a lacquer. It can be sculpted. And so each and every single Ichimatsu is one of a kind. That's it. They're all one of a kind. And so this is Miss Saitama in Charleston, South Carolina. And this, when you look at her facial features, you can see the artistry, the fullness of the cheeks, the depth of the philtrum, the incised elements around the eyes. That's all individual, all individual. So when we look at the extant dolls done by Koryusai, extant friendship dolls done by Koryusai, we can see that each one have a similarity by his hand, but each one's different. So we've already met, so going top, left, across, and then going down the rows, we have Miss Akita, Miss Tokushima, I'm giving the names as they are known now. So Miss Tokushima, Miss Mie, Miss Fukushima, Miss Fukuoka, Miss Hiroshima, Miss Nagasaki, Miss Kochi, Miss Hiroshima, but we'll get into that a little bit in a minute. Miss Hyogo, Miss Shimane, Miss Saitama, again, we just looked at Miss Saitama, Miss Chosun representing Korea, Miss Okayama, living in Fargo, North Dakota, Miss Taiwan in the Los Angeles Natural History Museum, and that's sort of put a little pin in that little comment because we'll be getting back to that momentarily. Miss Toyama, and then Miss Yamanashi in Wyoming, and Miss Ibaragi in the Public Museum in Milwaukee. Now, all of these share certain hallmarks. We'll get into that and we'll be seeing that and emphasizing that a little bit more. But if those of you who know your friendship doll lore, we also know that these don't represent all. These are only 18 of the dolls. And so a 19th is this one, Miss Tokyo Shi. Now, Miss Tokyo Shi got mixed up and we became known as Miss Saga. Originally, she was supposed to go to the YWCA in Rochester, Richmond, Virginia, excuse me, but ended up somehow in Pennsylvania and went missing. And this is really the best extant photograph of her taken in Philadelphia in 1928. See her open mouth expression and the very wonderful, wonderful kimono, somewhat similar to Miss Ishikawa in Montana, but a beautiful obi. Alas, she's missing. And so we know that he made 25 dolls, so there are a number of dolls, a number of our missing dolls still. We still have 10 unaccounted for, or 10 that we just really can't lay our hands on. And a good number of those are going to be by Koryusai, just by the numbers that we have learned. But I wanted to return here again. When I first was doing research for my book on the Japanese friendship dolls, this particular doll was in a private collection. She had been tentatively identified as Miss Kantoshu, which was a mistake. We subsequently found out her crest on her kimono was this lovely plum crest. And in the course of research for that book, I was able to, and actually going back to Miss Taiwan at the Natural History Museum, I was there looking at their archives, and I found this amazing photograph of the same doll at her Sobetsukai, or going away ceremony. And it turns out that this is the original Miss Hiroshima. And so in the photograph, you can see of Miss Hiroshima at her Sobetsukai in September of 1927. And if we zoom in, we can see the exact same crest there, the plum crest. Now, one thing that had been very frustrating while I was doing my research is that because of the situation there at the Natural History Museum, I was never able to do a deep dive into all of the accessories that the museum had recorded as being in storage for their doll, Miss Taiwan. There was no visual document, so we didn't know what they looked like. We had this archival photograph. We had Miss Taiwan herself, a Koryusai doll, bearing a completely different crest, by the way. But when we finally did, just a few years after my book was published, I was able to get in and actually find, and I was delighted to find furnishings, that dogu, that matched the crest, that plum crest that was in the archival photograph for Miss Hiroshima. So we know that this doll that was once in private collection is the original Miss Hiroshima based on the crest, but now also we have a few examples of her furnishings that are in storage with Miss Taiwan, mistakenly, there at the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles. And so if we look at a few of the pieces and look at that, do a comparison with that archival photograph, we can see the sewing kit, the exact same one that's in the lower right of that archival photograph. Now, things continue to move, and Miss Hiroshima, the doll that is Miss Hiroshima, the original Miss Hiroshima, is now at the Barry Art Museum in Norfolk, Virginia at Old Dominion University. And this is a photograph of Carolyn Barry and Aoki Masaru from Japan. He came over to help sort of rearrange her kimono and get her just sort of organized for her debut at the Barry Art Museum there in Norfolk, Virginia. And I encourage everyone to go visit that beautiful museum that also includes a number of good Japanese dolls. I'm very proud of those. And also, of course, visit Miss Hiroshima. Now, of course, having two Miss Hiroshimas in the Northeastern Corridor has caused a little bit of a kerfuffle. And so just to clarify, the doll at the Barry Art Museum is the original Miss Hiroshima, and the doll in Baltimore at the Baltimore Art Museum, long known as Miss Hiroshima, is actually the original Miss Yamagata. And so here we have her, Miss Hiroshima Yamagata, as she is now at the Baltimore Museum. And then here is her original Sobetsukai photograph. And if you do just a cursory look, you can see the kimono pattern is the same, but as you do a deeper dive, the family crests are the same. So we know for a fact that the doll in Baltimore, long known as Miss Hiroshima, is actually the original Yamagata. And so it's not a power play by the new Arriviste doll there at the Barry Art Museum, but this in point of fact is the original Miss Hiroshima, and I've just gotten a lot of inquiries about that, and let's just put that to rest. One is the original Miss Hiroshima there at the Barry Art Museum, the other is Miss Hiroshima Yamagata, and a little bit cumbersome, but there we go. For those of you who really get deep into your friendship doll lore, know that there is yet another Koryusai doll out there, known as Miss Osaka Shi, there at the Newark Museum in Newark, New Jersey. And this doll is a beautiful doll, beautiful Koryusai doll, has been there from the beginning and known as Miss Osaka. But that turns out to be slightly a misnomer for some very interesting reasons. And I'll do a brief thing because we are dealing with Koryusai. The doll is by Koryusai. However, the original Miss Osaka Shi was supposed to be one of those 7 dolls created by Maruhei Okiheizo of Kyoto that I mentioned. So here is an archival photograph showing 3 of the Maruhei dolls. So you have Miss Kyoto, Miss Kobe, and Miss Osaka there at the top. Miss Osaka being the doll on the right, Miss Kobe being the doll in the middle, and Miss Kyoto, of course, being the doll on the left. And then below that, in small inset, you have a photograph of Miss Osaka and Miss Osaka Fu, representing sort of the county, if you will, surrounding Osaka, made by Hirata Goyo, on display at the Osaka City Hall, being acknowledged as Miss Osaka. But then suddenly, very inexplicably, we find another doll insinuated into the equation, being called Miss Osaka Shi, or the doll representing the city of Osaka. So in the top right, we have that same archival photograph in City Hall showing the Maruhei made Miss Osaka there on the left doll. But then on the left-hand photograph, we find another ceremony taking place very shortly thereafter, of dolls of Goyo's Miss Osaka Fu, and another doll now being presented as Miss Osaka. Now, this is shocking. The kimono is different, but more importantly, it is no longer a Maruhe doll. It is a Tokyo-made doll, a Tokyo-style Ichimatsu. And after that, every single photograph showing Miss Osaka in Japan features this new, inexplicable doll known as Miss Osaka. So at the bottom left, at the big Sobetsukai going away ceremony in Tokyo, the final one before they boarded their ship, you have Miss Japan, and then right next, Miss Osaka. But now it's the new Miss Osaka. Then in the famous photograph of all 58 dolls after they arrived in San Francisco at the Kimongakuen, there is Miss Osaka there on the middle thing. Again, it's the same doll done by Koryusai, not by Maruhe. And then finally, for this exchange, at the big celebration in Washington, D.C., the bottom row, we have Miss Japan on the left, Miss Yokohama on the right, both Maruhe dolls, and in the middle, representing the city of Osaka, you have a Tokyo-made Ichimatsu done by Koryusai. Now, what's super intriguing is when we go to Newark and we get underneath all those silken robes and see the body of the doll, we find on the right would be what we would expect. And that is a label of the Tokyo Wholesale Doll Traders Association with Koryusai written there going in diagonal. And then the Wholesale Traders Association in Japanese. So these are the labels that should be on the back of every single friendship doll. Yet when we look at the doll that is in Newark's collection, there is no label. So the doll, by all accounts, is a Koryusai doll based on physiognomy, based on everything, but there is no label. It is a last-minute switch, a switcheroony that took place in Osaka. We do not know what happened to the original Maruhe-made doll, but it was substituted by a very large-scale Koryusai doll, and she still exists as Miss Osaka. She in Newark, New Jersey. No, it's not the doll's fault, but it's just not the original Miss Osaka. And the Miss Osaka Fu by Goyo is in Columbus, Ohio, at the History Center there in Columbus. So, Koryusai. Koryusai, already well known, already celebrated as a lineage, became incredibly popular, incredibly successful following the Friendship Doll Exchange. And so, in many ways, this represents what's a little bit of a yin and a yang, a push me, pull you, a little bit of a tug of war. Because he was so popular, there was a pressure upon him to make mini Ichimatsu. And so like all artisans, he struggled in some respects to keep up. He had his students, he had his atelier. And so to make his dolls, he had to started making dolls of various levels of quality. He continued to make beautiful, large-scale Ichimatsu Ningyo like this pair that came through my hands last year. Absolutely stunning, just shy of friendship doll height, male and female, but all the characteristics, a bright, beautiful, bright expression, the sorrel crest there, matching for both male and female. Eyelashes, you can just see a hint of eyelashes on his eyes, representing that this really was top flight. A beautiful, lovely hands, naturalistic, well-rendered, kicker kimono, just really wonderful, swallows in flight. The girl as well, so lovely with her eyelashes and beautiful face, and underneath her kimono we find the Koryusai Takizawa Yoshitoyo seal and Koryusai shomei or signature. But beautiful, beautiful girl doll. And quite frequently as we started, you know, the textiles are a major hook. And so when we look at the hand formation set against this lustrous figured silk kimono with supplemental embroidery, the obi dragon there on the middle of this beautiful brocade obi, Koryusai continued to make and dedicated himself to the rest of his life to making top flight Ichimatsu Ningyo, but he also made more commercial oriented, affordable, you know, frankly, Ichimatsu, girls and boys. And so this is a beautiful, lovely Ichimatsu of that latter category. All the hallmarks of a fabulous Ichimatsu by Koryusai. There is signature again, a beautiful purple silk crepe kimono, obi, all the accessories that one goes to expect. Just very much of type of Koryusai make in the 1930s. And so similarly, here's a beautiful boy by Koryusai with a lovely haori depicting a Boys' Day helmet on the back. But just again, lovely face, perfect bright expression, nice hands. And so there was these became, as you start looking, you begin to see what comprises a Koryusai Ichimatsu, boy and girl. The faces they're all different, yet they have a similarity. And frequently people use the word bright or happy or light as a way to describe them. And so here together, you can see all at least the boy section that we were looking at, and how similar and yet individual, all of these faces, all by Koryusai, all wonderful examples. And so just sort of absorb that a little bit just to get a sense of what the hallmarks are of the face. Now, contrast that with Iwamura Shokensai, the first, Shokensai, as I mentioned before, another celebrated Ichimatsu Ningyo artist, and he made 10 of the friendship dolls, and his faces were known for having a slightly more fuller-cheeked, a little bit more somber tone. So we have two Koryusai dolls on the right-hand side, a girl and boy at the bottom right hand. Left hand is Iwamura Shokensai. And so side-by-side comparison, you get to get a sense of Koryusai's faces are very much his own. It's almost his signature, if you will. And Shokensai as well, his own, very distinctive faces. As you begin to absorb and look at more and more of these, you begin to see the hallmarks of what goes into a Shokensai face versus what goes into a Koryusai face. Now, this is going to be a little bit of an interesting experiment. So here are sort of a tableau, if you will, a patchwork quilt of Ichimatsu boy faces, each one different, each one distinctive, yet similar in its own way. And so I'm going to give you a few minutes using the Jeopardy countdown to actually study these in detail, as you will. Just look at them, see what ones, what the characteristics are. And then at the end of the 2 minutes, we'll have a reveal out of how many of these are Koryusai and which one. Hint, they're not all Koryusai. So spend a little bit of time looking at their facial shape, looking at their expressions, looking at their manner of presentation. Now, obviously, they're not all exactly one angle, but they're all there. So give you a few minutes just to absorb all of that. So there we go. You've had a few minutes to study and look. So how many dolls by Koryusai did you find? So the answer, the official And correct answer is 4. 4 dolls. Now, some of these you've seen before. The doll in the middle top, you've seen his bright face before, but I'm introducing some new ones just to see if you picked up. So we have top left, he was in the grid, Koryusai Boy, Out of the Atelier by Namikawa. Then beautiful Koryusai Boy, classic there, the top middle that you'd seen before. Below that, an unusual one with hair, and then another classic boy on the right. So these are the 4 that were, and I'll back 4, and we'll back up to that grid. These are the 4, you can find them there. So the Namikawa boy is top row, second from left. The bright-faced boy, sort of in the middle, is 4th row from left, 2 down. Then down below him, the boy with the hair. And then the final one over on the right, final row, 3rd one down from the top. Those are your 4 Koryusai, and they come out this way. Now, many of you might have picked this one, and that is understandable. Very much many of the similar hallmarks, and I myself would have thought that this was by Koryusai if I didn't have the added advantage of knowing that this is actually by Hogyokusai. We have the signature of Hogyokusai there underneath his kimono. We don't know much about Hogyokusai, but it's entirely possible that he was a student of Koryusai, but very much bearing some of his signature elements, but it is by Hogyokusai. So you have to be cautious. It could look like a Koryusai doll, but when you get the kimono off, it's not. This is still a fine doll, but it's just by Hogyokusai as opposed to Koryusai. Now, this boy, I'm sure, threw some people off because of the hair, but he's a lovely, beautiful, beautiful doll. Love this treatment on the hair, but in a beautiful purple kimono with an unusual standing wisteria crest with the 10 figure inside that. Absolutely lovely. A little bit of fading there to the front. See the crest there on the back and the beautiful, rich purple textiles. And there is his signature of Koryusai and Takizawa Yoshitoyu there in the rakan. So classically, this is what Koryusai seals look like. And then, but every now and then you get a little bit of an exception. And that is in this doll. This is by Koryusai, but sold through the atelier of Namikawa Ningyoten in Kyoto. So even though Koryusai was a Tokyo maker, atelier all over the country would have been purchasing and clamoring for Koryusai dolls to sell to their clients. Sometimes atelier would not list the doll artisan, but market it under their name. Maruhe was infamous for excluding doll artisans' names and only using their own interior labeling system. And I go into that in great detail in my book and a little bit in my new book on Ichimatsu, and a little bit of that in the Friendship Doll book as well. But when we peel back the layers and look at the Namikawa Ningyoten, that's a very readily spotted label or recognized label. We also find an additional glyph, if you will, that's included that says Taki, as in Takizawa Koryusai. So they comparing it, seeing how the faces of Koryusai, and this, it is believed that Namikawa would periodically include glyphs related indications of the doll artisan who made it, even though the full name is not there. So here we have that face, a typical Koryusai signature, and then the Taki character from a Namikawa doll for this young boy in the bottom. Now, I want to return to this figure that we started with on Koryusai. This is Koryusai on the right in the process of making Ichimatsu Ningyo. Now, Koryusai was Koryusai 2. I mentioned that he studied under his father, who passed in 1910. And then Koryusai took over the lineage in 1910 and continued until his passing in 1966. He was born in 1888, by the way. So from 1888 to 1966 is his lifespan. And he was very active from 1910 to the Friendship Doll phase and then all the way up to the war. Very, very productive. He had a son. Now, the son was scheduled to take over the lineage as the next Koryusai. And by all accounts, he was brilliant and likely to surpass his father. in skill and popularity. But unfortunately, following an accident in which he was hit by a car accident in which he was rear-ended by a cement truck, he developed a tremble in his hand and was no longer able to do what's known as the menso, or the painting of the facial features, and he regretfully had to stop making ningyo, and so the lineage stopped in Koryusai too. However, if we look at this photograph, there is hope in that we have this young boy who's working as an assistant to Koryusai, and that is Fujimura Shiun. Fujimura Shiun had started his apprenticeship with Koryusai at the age of 13, and 4 years later, so he started at 13 in 1920, just after the earthquake, and 4 years later, in 1927, when the Friendship Doll event happened, he was one of the apprentices working, so he was 17 years old, helping Koryusai make his dolls. And so this is a well-distributed press photo showing Koryusai at work, making part of his submissions. Total of 25 were accepted, and this is part of those being made with Fujimura Shiun, the first, as his apprentice. Now, I didn't know who this was in the photograph, but I talked to Fujimura Kokan. Now, some of you may know Fujimura Kokan from his appearance at the UFDC Doll Convention in Nashville a couple of years ago. Those of you who went on my tour last time to Japan would very much know Fujimura-san, because this is a photograph of him taken by Stephanie Blythe, the amazing contemporary doll artist. Stephanie was on my trip, and she took this photograph of Fujimura Kokan demonstrating his work. His father's trained under Koryusai. He trained under his father, and so very much feels that he's part of the Koryusai lineage. And so he's just an exceptional contemporary Ichimatsu ningyo maker, very much at the height of his game, creating stunning traditional Ichimatsu with a little bit of a modernist twist, his own very signature face, but also a wide range of dolls, some of which I consider to be sort of sosaku or art dolls, because they are so far beyond the pale of a classic Ichimatsu that they're becoming his own in an art doll format. Now, you may ask, if he was a student of Fujimura Shiun the first, why isn't he known as Fujimura Shiun the second? Well, he decided, because his take was a little bit more idiosyncratic and he wanted to go his own way, he decided to take the name Kokan. Well, first it was Meho, and then Kokan, and never adopting the Shiun name. That honor went to his nephew. Fujimura Shiun II studied under Fujimura Kokan and took on the name of Fujimura Shiun II as he went independent and started his own. So they work together, they work at the same time, but Fujimura Shiun II represents yet part of the Koryusai lineage that will extend into the future. Now, another student of Fujimura Kokan is Yamasaki Meisho. Now, Yamasaki-san is, or Meisho-san, is very interesting in that she's the only woman working in traditional Tokyo-style Ichimatsu today. She has quite the following. TV programs are done with her demonstrating her skills. For those of you who came to Nashville, again, for the UFDC, she was there. But she's known, she has her own style, a little bit more whimsical, and again, following in the Koryusai lineage, but again, taking her own drift in her own direction, making them very much her own. And this was a display that she had at Yoshitoku during our last tour. Two little Ichimatsu there on the sofa. I fell in love with this little twin couple there on the sofa. But again, here is Fujimura-san on the left, and Yamasaki Meisho-san on the right, myself, and then Sayuri Shin, a beautiful contemporary bisque, French bisque doll maker of extraordinary skills. She's been very helpful helping to communicate and maintain contact with Fujimura-san after he went back to Japan for me. So very much indebted to her. But Fujimura-san's become very much a source of information about the the state of the Ichimatsu artisans after the war. He met Goyo personally, shared many personal anecdotes about Goyo and his own upbringing as an Ichimatsu Ningyo maker. And I'm totally indebted to Fujimura-san for so many things, and his imprint is in many aspects of my book that will be forthcoming. So there we go. I'm not sure how far in I am and how many of you are still with me, but that is a quick dive into the Koryusai lineage, history, and state of play today. And I touch on a lot of the Ichimatsu component in all three of my books, which are available on Amazon or through contacting me directly. I can get those to you. And then also I want to proudly reintroduce my new book, my latest book, Ichimatsu Japanese Play Dolls. It is in China as we speak, getting printed, and it will be available in July. I will be releasing it. Its launch, if you will be at the UFDC in Baltimore, and the first physical copies will exchange hands there. And then I'll be able to take orders, but nothing will be able to be shipped out until after the UFDC in July. But Ichimatsu Japanese Play Dolls, again, a deep dive into the history, development of Ichimatsu Ningyo, and exploring the artisans that made them famous and are practicing today. And again, my name is Alan Scott Pate. I focus on antique Japanese dolls, and I hope you can visit my website, which is newly launched, brand new, revivified, completely retooled website is up now, launching it in conjunction with the virtual doll convention. So please run and go to www.antiquejapanesedolls.com for a completely new aesthetic take on my website, and shows inventory that I currently have, including Ichimatsu, that are for sale, in addition to what I'll have in the sales room here at the Virtual Doll Convention. Also, a little bit more self-publicity here. If you want to go to my Facebook page, you'll find that I have a number of videos, a whole series called Notson Ningyo, a video series that covers many aspects of Japanese doll history and culture. This began during the initial COVID lockdown about a year ago, and I was successful in putting out about 13 of these back to back. It became a little exhausting. I took a break, 15 total, and a new one will be out soon, The Ties That Bind, looking at Japanese doll exchanges in the 1930s. So Ichimatsu mostly, not the friendship dolls, but the legacy of the friendship dolls in terms of what other doll exchanges that inspired, and looking at that. So again, my name is Alan Scott Pate. Look for me at the Virtual Doll Convention here in the sales room, and also website, also Facebook page. And thank you so much for your kind attention. And I look forward to seeing you all soon. Take care. All the best. Bye.